a lot of times we're prepared coming out of school to work for someone else. No shade on that. But at
Mhm.
some point in your journey, you started entrepreneurship. And I want to know like the first thing you started where you said, I want to do something of my own to generate income. Talk to us about that.
Ooh. Well, it probably wasn't on my own.
Okay.
I also married this wonderful human being who has an entrepreneurial spirit of himself. And so he ran an insurance agency for a very, very long time. And as his spouse, I made sense of the finances of that. Well, there came a point in our lives where I had this corporate dream and I was working the corporate job and it was good until it started interrupting with the way that I wanted to parent.
Mm.
And I said, okay, this is not working for my mental health and for what I believe my children need. So I left the job. Well, in leaving the job, now I had more time for my hobbies. And at that time, the hobby that kind of dominated my time was photography. Because when you are a stay-at-home parent, it gets you out the house, it gets you talking to people. It was stimulating all my creative juices. It was doing that. I was getting a lot of I'm sorry. My camera was getting a lot of invitations to birthday parties. Baby showers and weddings, and all of those
Were you
things.
charging?
No, I wasn't charging. It was a hobby. I
Okay.
was just doing it because I loved it. I loved doing it. People knew that I loved doing it. I had the equipment to do it. Looking back, the photos were terrible, but that's a part of the journey of like, you know, evolving your ministry. And I was just doing it. And my husband said to me one day, he said, "You're gone every weekend. You want new camera equipment. You probably need to make this a business." And I cringed because I didn't want to. But I also knew that in order for me to keep doing it the way that I wanted to do it, in order for me to grow creatively in the way that I wanted to grow creatively, I had to start charging. I was either going to start charging so I could grow as a creative, or I was going to have to stop doing it because it was no longer it didn't make sense. I would become stagnant.
Prudence. I love that you said that. And I know we're this is not even the main business that we're talking about here, but what you said there is so important. I think a lot of times, and if you listen to this podcast and you watch this podcast for over and over, you'll hear a consistent theme where we always talk about pricing and charging for your stuff. And there's a resistance, right? Because people think if it's ministry, if it's something I want to do to help others, I shouldn't charge. But you just said something, and it reiterates something that others have said. If you don't at some point generate some income, there's a cap on your ability to get better in that thing, to
Yes.
help people in a better way. And
Yes.
there's a cap on the length and the longevity of this thing, because after a while you're gonna run out of just the willingness to put your own money into that thing. And you'll be
Yeah.
like, okay, this is done.
Yeah.
So it ends, and you actually will serve less people if you don't charge for it.
Facts. Facts.
Yeah.
And the cap is very, very low,
Yeah.
because you still have to reserve time for what it is that feeds your family, what it is that gets you to be able to go on vacation. You still have to reserve time and emotional energy for that. So yes, there is a cap. If you want to grow in your whatever that gift is, you either have to be willing to charge for it so that you can have the resources to expand it, or you have to be willing to decide that the low ceiling is sufficient for you.
Yeah. Okay, so photography, which is so interesting, right? Because I think the first time we met, I remember photography and money management were both something.
They were both
So
struggling.
when did you start monetizing as a business the financial management part of it? Because we you talked about the photography, like when did the second one kind of start up?
So I call myself a right brain, left brain person, right? So I'm the convergence of opposites, and I like it. Like I can change the oil on my car, and I can put on a pretty dress, and none would be the wiser.
Right.
And so I've always had a space where I would maintain a small group of private clients that had some financial need, whether it was taxes, whether it was budgeting, whether I was serving on the finance committee at church, but there was always a space where finance was like still a predominant part in my life. Well, what began to happen to me is that as I began to grow in photography, I was in these photography groups and people would ask finance related questions and I would answer it. And after a while, it became like, oh, wait a minute. Like, she might know a little bit, right? Because they only knew me as a photographer. And those questions kept coming in. Eventually, I had to create a calendar so that people could book times to have conversations with me. Eventually, I had to start sending out invoices so that people could pay for the time, because now this thing was becoming its thing. And I think right around the period when you met me was where I was trying to juggle both. I was trying to run the photography business, hardcore. And I was like dipping my toe into being a consultant to entrepreneurs, which was different from the private consultation that I was doing before. And so that's kind of where you met me. Now I'm very clear. And it took some time. It took a few years for me to realize that, okay, photography is something I love to do, but it might have to take a backseat, it has taken a backseat to the financial services that I'm providing. Because in this phase of my life, I think this is where God wants me to be.